evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to the Pragati Vichar Literature Festival. This is a festival where we meet and the words meet impact and stories create change. PVLF is a platform dedicated to uplifting talents, authors, and creators who deserve the spotlight. Here, we celebrate voices that truly inspire, just like the both of you. After the blockbuster success of PVLF 2024, we are back with another grand edition, and the excitement is already in the air. This year's theme, Creating Resilience Through Storytelling, is particularly close to our hearts as we explore how stories and poems build mental health and resilience. I am a psychologist at I'm a senior psychologist at Soul Wellness. I'm Vinita Agrawal, just to introduce myself as well. Today, we will be diving into the Author Marathon, a special segment where we engage with brilliant authors and poets who are shaping narratives of hope, perseverance, and resilience. The topic for today is Tomorrow's Voices, Poetry as a Tool for Change, and we'll explore the unique theme of poetry of resilience. It's going to be an inspirational session about how poetry isn't just a creative art. It's a catalyst for change, a bridge between personal and universal experiences, and a medium that evokes deep emotions while inspiring action. I'm thrilled to welcome two phenomenal poets whose words have touched our hearts, challenged the minds, and inspired change, both in India and across the world. Let me introduce them. First, we have Vinita Agrawal, a celebrated poet and an author of 8 poetry books, including 2 anthologies and of climate change. Her latest collection, Eartha, was published by Sahitya Academy, and her book, Twilight Language, won the prestigious Proverse Prize Hong Kong 2021. Vinita has also received accolades such as Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize 2018 and the Gayatri Gamarsh Memorial Award for Literary Excellence in the USA. Beyond poetry, she wears many hats. She co-edits the yearbook series of Indian poetry in English, serves on the advisory board of Tagore Literary Prize, and is co-chair for the Global Council for Excellence in Environment and Sustainability. Vinita, your contributions to poetry, especially your work on climate change, have been groundbreaking. We are honored to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Mahima.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for that introduction.
Next, we have Tanushi. Joining us today is an incredibly talented Tanushi Singh. She is the author of 5 accomplished internationally poet books, included and much loved Heart in the Hurricane, which was recently featured on the weekly trending book list at Writers Excellence 2024. Tanushi is a multifaceted individual, an army wife, blogger, teacher, a poet who has earned recognition globally. She's been nominated 3 times for the Times Group of Author Awards for Women and was recently honored the International Excellence Award 2024 by Exler Books. In July 2024, she was featured in Today's Magazine as one of the 50 under 50 personalities, making it across the nation. Tanushi, your work speaks of resilience, perseverance, and positivity, and we can't wait to hear your insight today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now that we've introduced our incredible panelists today, let's dive into today's discussion. We're talking about resilience, something we've all needed to build, especially in the last few years, especially since COVID and all the issues that have been increasing up until now. Poetry, as we know, has the power to evoke deep emotions and inspire change. So the first question that we have, as mentioned about poetry, how do you define resilience in your poetry, and how does it reflect in your writing process? I would start with Vinita, and then we'll come to you, Tanushi.
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to hear the word resilience being used next to poetry, with poetry, adjacent to poetry, because poetry is not mere an outpouring of emotions or a narrative of your personal accounts, but poetry has a larger cause and a larger role to play in terms of building resilience in society and bringing forth the strength that lies at the core of all of us and bringing it to the forefront. So I personally write from the heart, and when I write, I aim for the reader's heart as well. So for me, it's very, very important to write honestly. And the honesty with which I approach this medium of art and this process of writing, I think brings about a certain element of resilience to my work. Also, when you're writing about subjects like environment and eco poetry, and also poetry that leads to some sort of a societal change, it's very important uh, to focus on that element of resilience. So I try my best, whether consciously or unconsciously, I try to do that. And I'd also like to quote a very beautiful quotation that I read somewhere. Um, it's by Teresita Fernandez, when she says that pivotal lessons in our lives continue to work on us in subtle subterranean waves. And this is what comes out. This is what comes out when we actually put pen to paper and we go deep down into our thoughts, diving into the depths of our heart and bringing up something that has meant um, a lot to us, and something that might make a difference to society when we write about it.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. And I completely agree with the point that you made about the discussion of resilience when it comes with environment.
Yeah.
Great. Tanushi, what would you like to give us your inputs on the same question?
So as Vinita rightly says, poetry for me also is like a synonym for resilience, because that's how it started for me. See, being an army wife and I've always been in the forces. My dad was a naval officer, so I've lived this life. This is the only life I know. So from a very young age, I realized that, as army wives or as defense wives, resilience is something that is ingrained in us, something that just we live with it whenever we have to face challenges, living away from our husbands, managing everything on our own, or living in places which are dangerous, and there's lots going on, around us. So resilience comes easily, I believe, because of the situations that we experience in our life. So I would say, being an army wife, being in the defense, as a defense child, as a naval kid, resilience was something that I saw at a very young age, through my personal experiences and through experiences that saw all around me. How poetry happened was by chance. It happened. I come from no literature background, but it is something that I developed on my own, and I realized how much creative writing was healing me as a person. So I totally vouch for how much poetry can heal a person. Just by writing, you can, find a voice within yourself. You can seek strength through writing, and especially I felt that through my own writing journey. Yeah,
that's actually really nicely put across. And as a psychologist, I definitely agree with the power of writing things, journaling, poetry, putting it into, putting it on a paper, and then of course in a structure, in your way that you would want to enter emotions. And rightly mentioned about resilience in the army background as well. There's
yes.
a lot. Only recently have we started talking about resilience in actual army personnel, let alone their family members. So, there's a lot that goes on there as well. So, thank you so much for sharing that. Next, we would like to move to the next question now. So, both of you have received recognition on national and international platforms. Clearly, your journey has been pivotal in shaping your work. So, could you share how your personal experiences influence the themes you explore in your poetry, especially when addressing societal and environmental challenges? So, Tanushi, let's start with you now.
So I have always written more about personal strength, courage, how to deal with challenges. Because I was writing for myself. How it turned into books was something that it was a byproduct of the content I kept creating. Right. So my writing has been more for myself. It has been a self healing journey for me. Poetry. So as I said, through these books, I try to reach out to the readers and create like I have a blog page on Facebook called Create, Believe, Inspire. This I am first a blogger and then an author. So the idea of sharing poetry was to create a platform where readers read poetry and feel heard and understood, because there are a lot of people who feel a lot of things but are not able to articulate it or write it or express it. But maybe when you read it and you feel like, okay, yeah, somebody else also feels the same way, and we are all together in this struggle of trying to figure out life. So that's how, for me, poetry became a platform to reach out. I started writing for a forum called Poetry Planet. That's where I learned poetry. It's an international forum on Facebook. I learned how to write different forms of poetry from this platform, and that's how it reached international market. And two of my books were published by a Philippine lady who's the founder of this platform, Poetry Planet. So that's how I reached the international readers. But it all happened by organically. I didn't plan it. I was just trying to heal myself, honestly speaking, and reach out to others. It's by saying that, maybe we can heal together, one poem at a time. Yeah.
That's very nicely put, one poem at a time. And yes, that's actually, a lot that, like you mentioned again, it makes complete sense and is very insightful.
Yeah, so your question is how has the journey of my life shaped the themes that I write on in poetry? So life has always been a test of endurance, like it is for everyone, I guess. I mean, who amongst us can say that life is a piece of cake? Life is full of obstacles, and we need to overcome, those kind of situations and those challenges in life. So I have been writing poetry for a very, very long time. In fact, my mother used to say that I used to write when I was very young. Small, very 4-line poems when I was like a 5 or 6 year old. But then I became a closet poet. Growing up, I would write, but not publish my poetry, just put them in a cupboard and lock them up. It was only I think, in the early 2000s that I came out with my work. And initially, I started writing about gender issues, issues around women and the fortitude that women display, and things related to women's issues. And from there, I moved on to existential questions, everything that life throws at us and the way we deal with it. It was only during the pandemic that I kind of focused on environmental poetry, eco poetry, because the whole experience of the pandemic sort of pointed all of us towards nature. It made us nature facing, so to speak. And we began to realize that not only are we responsible for a lot of damage that we've done to our earth, but also how important and essential it is to undo that damage and um, do something to change our circumstances. So, and also, poetry is something that can inspire us. It can enrage us sometimes. It can spark joy in the darkest of spaces. So, as and when life has taken its twists and turns, I have indulged in all of that kind of poetry, and also kept it at a very intimate level, but also always trying to find the universal in the personal. Because when you want to touch a chord in your reader, then you must make whatever is personal universal. That's the only way that others can identify with what you're writing and what you're trying to say. So those are the things that have shaped my poetry, I guess.
Thank you so much for sharing. And that's, literally using poetry as a canvas to our emotions, as you mentioned. Thank you for sharing that. And speaking of poetry and how it has evolved over time, it's something that is timeless, be it discussing it during war, or people writing letters and poems during war, to us studying it in school, to now. It is timeless, and it is however, the way that it has portrayed has changed over time, and it's constantly evolving as well. Do you think that experimenting with modern platforms like social media or spoken word performances enhances the poetry's impact? So Tanushi, let's start with you now.
I hope my first question you could hear the entire thing
Yes,
because
yes, yeah.
I don't know what
We heard the whole
happened. Sorry,
Yeah, I think
sorry
there was
for the
something with the
disturbance
network.
here.
No
Yes.
issues. It was all clear.
So regarding the current way the poetry is coming up, I think what is happening in today's youth is poetry is coming up. They, especially the spoken word and those platforms where people come and speak, open mic poetry. These are really coming up. People are speaking up, leaving their inhibitions and trying out contemporary poetry, if not any other form. This is the form that is really working out and popular because it's easy. There's not too much structure, and in fact, that's the style I enjoy the most, free verse, because it's comes naturally to me. It's not so strict in its structure, right? So that is what I think is coming up more in the youth, especially in the youth. And I think it is very effective too, because people are able to vocally discuss things that usually people wouldn't talk about so easily. So it's become poetry has become a platform where you can discuss from politics to environmental change to girl empowerment or injustices, well, regarding women or even men. There are topics of abuse that you can discuss in either gender, and there are topics that nobody wants to talk about, but when you talk about it in poetry it can get viral, if you speak in the right way or share it in the right manner. So that can help. I think it can help. It gives a lot of power to people to share their views and opinions.
Right,
This kind of
that's actually true, and it's making it more accessible for the younger audience as well to
yes,
genuinely access and make impact out of poetry as well.
yes.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Vinita, what would you like to say on this?
Yeah, I'm all for sharing poetry on all kinds of platforms, whether it's the spoken mic or the Instagram or the micro verses on Twitter and all other forms of social media. But having said that, there are a lot of dimensions to this aspect of that poetry has kind of gotten into uh, in our times, because we need to sift what is poetry from non-poetry. Everybody has a social media handle, and that kind of has turned everyone into a poet. But the truth is that poetry is a very fine art, and it's a very definitive art. Not everything that's on the social media can be categorized as poetry. The advantage of having poetry out on the social media is that it makes the millennials and the Gen Zs also take to writing poetry and sharing poetry, and they all come out with a pen in their hands. So that's a great thing. But my only word of caution here is that we need to sift poetry from non-poetry, and be very mindful about what is being shared. And we need to be mindful that poetry is a very fine craft, and we don't compromise that craft when we share it on all these platforms. And I feel that things like rhythm and the impact of the spoken word is much more in spoken poetry as compared to page poetry. But well, like I said, we need to turn to that with a little bit of caution.
Great. Thank you so
So
much for
if
actually mentioning that.
I think what
Yes.
she's trying to say is if it is conveyed in the right manner, people shouldn't misuse it, and like every other person will try and want to be, as I said, want to get viral. So in the
Right.
in that age of it should be in the right with the right intent. The intent should be
True.
right. It should not be just to get
Main
famous.
purpose.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of it is just prose, rhetoric prose that comes through as poetry. So
Right.
we need to be careful that poetry is being portrayed as a poem and not just a narrative prose, which happens sometimes. But it's a good thing that poetry is spreading to all these various other platforms, and the young people are getting involved in the process of writing.
Right, that's true. But of course, like you said, maintaining that caution to
Yeah,
genuinely
very
keep
important.
poetry impactful and not
It's
just,
very
like I
important.
said, a meme purpose.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing your inputs on that. So moving on, as poets, your work would resonate with a lot of people, again, in India as well as universally. But there's a lot that we tackle on our own personal ends as well. And there's something that I have seen and understood both personally and professionally as a psychologist. So how do you ensure that your voices remain authentic while addressing the topics that demand such collective attention? And whether it's climate change, whether it's mental health, whether it's resilience, how do you ensure that your voice remains authentic in that situation? Vinita, let's start with you now.
Yeah. Yeah, I like I said earlier also that when you write with honesty and you write from the gut, then there is that element of truth that is transferred to your poetry, and that keeps the voice authentic. And I'd also like to quote a very beautiful quote I have here by Twyla Tharp. She says, "When I walk into the studio, I am alone, but I am alone with my body, ambition, ideas, passions, needs, memories, goals, prejudices, distractions, and fears. These 10 items are at the heart of who I am. Whatever I'm going to create will be a reflection of how these have shaped my life and how I've learned to channel my experiences into them." So I couldn't have put it better than Twyla Tharp, so I thought I'd quote her here. Which is exactly what I was trying to say, that to create the universal in the personal, to write from the heart, to write with authenticity and honesty is the way that you can keep your voice distinctly your own and not lean into other people's other people's works to convey your own feelings.
Right, that's true. That making it your own, like I said, your own canvas to your own. Tanushi, what would you like to say on this?
So I think if you're really writing for yourself and not for the reader, when you're writing, if you're writing for yourself and not for the act of putting it online or sharing it or getting published, the authenticity will be retained because you're first writing for yourself. You right. So it is what is the intent of your writing? When I would say that for any aspiring writer, when you're writing, why are you writing? Are you writing to eventually just get published, or are you writing to for yourself? So for me, I have always written for myself, and I think that is why it resonates, because I truly didn't even think even one of my books would get published, because I didn't consider myself a great poet, or still don't, even after so many books, because I was just someone who was trying to figure out life through writing. And somehow it resonated with the readers. And why it resonated is because I think I was being authentic to my writing. I was just trying to write for my own self, to get better, to feel better, to retain that calm in the chaos, in this chaotic life. So I think that's what resonated with the readers.
That's actually really nicely put. And we would like to take this opportunity to very humbly disagree with you not being a good poet, because that's something that we are seeing across, again, in India as well as internationally. So we can see that we're genuinely thrilled to have you here. So yes, thank you for that. Yes. All right. So next, this as a topic was something that is again close to me as well, and I would also start talking about the fact that poetry generally also bridges the gap between personal and universal, like we've been discussing up until now, that it's authentic to you if you write for yourself. It's not for ulterior motives of publishing or getting viral. It's something that would bridge that personal and universal gap for us. So, how do you see the role of poets in creating a resilient and empathetic society in this global challenges that we face now? So, yes, Vinita, let's go with you.
Okay. Yes, actually, poetry should be considered and taken to be a very great medium for change, because poetry, if nothing else, it sensitizes the readers to so many issues and so many relevant problems and challenges and all of that. So I think poetry must emphasize social. The message of poetry must emphasize social change. And social change must be integral. That's what it means. That it should be integral to the ideas, beliefs, and goals which are woven throughout the writing process, whether it's prose or poetry. And we should positively engage with the community when we design our poems, when we write our poems. Although poetry, the act of writing poetry is a very spontaneous act, and it's a very personal sort of a commitment. But somewhere we need to find the voice of our poems addressing important changes in society. And we need to ask these questions to ourselves, that does it serve social justice issues? Poetry written just for your own sake alone, like a personal anecdote, a personal narrative that you might want to write about, uh, kind of defeats the purpose of such a large medium and can get across to people and make such a huge difference to them. So it should be at the forefront of all these changes that we desire in society. And in what ways can poets impact the civil rights movement? Who knows? That's a place that poetry can make a very, very big difference. Where does poetry stand in relation to the cataclysmic events like war, genocide, pandemic, climate change, etc.? So it's really important that our poetry addresses larger issues and does not stay closeted in the narrow confines of our own lives.
Right. That's again very insightful. Thank you for putting that across. All right. Yes, Tanushi. Thank you so much for that input. Yes.
So I think that there are various ways in which we can make poetry more. Honestly speaking, through all my poetry books, I've realized one thing: people want to hear you, but people don't want to buy your book and read your book. People don't have the patience to buy poetry books and read them. And there is also a myth or a kind of a block that poetry is too difficult to understand and won't be able. You won't be a normal ordinary person around will, that's the first impression you get, that it might be difficult to comprehend or might be difficult to understand the verse. But I think what I try through my writing is to put across simple words and put across the meaning, the deeper meaning of what I'm trying to say with simple words. Because I always feel that less is more. You don't have to write it in a very elaborate form. You can say what you want to say in a short poem, also a very effective way. I have always believed in less and more, less is more, and that's why I think most of my poems are shorter. They're not like lengthy 2-3 pages poems. That's the kind of style I follow, and I also believe that people don't have the patience to buy poetry, and that is one of the reasons why I'm so active on social media and sharing my work, because I do think it can instill change in people. The words that we write can instill positive growth in a person's mind. Because a lot of people are going through various challenges, and especially through the pandemic. There is a book that came out. My book came out after pandemic, Echoes of Silence. It was a book I basically wrote on a very spiritual theme. And when you write on spirituality or about God, it can get tricky because people are very emotional about one particular God, or so I had to be very neutral because I wanted to reach out to everyone. So I had to write it in a way where I'm not talking about a particular God, because and inherently also I'm not a very religious person. So that helped, because I'm though I'm a Hindu, I don't have this whole act of being religion person. I'm not religious per se. Maybe it comes from the background I come in, wherein we meet all kinds of religions and we live all in harmony. So that's also something that's ingrained deeply in me. And that's why when I was writing this book, I was trying to reach out to all religions, to everyone, and spread the message of peace through through the pandemic. Through the pandemic, I think we've gone through so much, and collectively we should have, it was like a wake up call, that beyond war, beyond everything is, first let's look, be there for each other for survival. That was like the wake up call for us. And also about the climate, how nature was enhanced and everything became clearer, and the birds were happier, and nature was flourishing without our presence. That was also another a very big wake up call for environmental change, right? So much we learned through the pandemic, through that whole 2 years of pandemic. Yeah.
That's true. This AQI issue that we've again come up with, especially in Delhi. I mean, it goes off the charts. It just goes at plus now. It was not a problem in those years, which was something like you said, nature was smiling again. So very
Yes.
nicely put. And since we are on you, Tanushi, I would also like to ask that your poetry often delves into the perseverance and positivity. In your book, in Heat in a Hurricane as well, resilience plays a central role. So, how did you weave resilience into the narrative of that book, and what message do you hope readers take away from this?
Yeah, so you spoke about my latest book, so let me just show my latest book. This is Heart in a Hurricane, the
Oh,
latest book that was released last year. And this book is basically about I would say married couples, couples who've or live-in couples. Now, live-in is also normal for couples who have lived together for years. So, love is not about. I wanted to talk about the truth about relationships. It's all not so rosy and happy, and there are so many challenges that go on when you live with someone, when you fall in love, when you want to survive a long relationship, any relationship, whether married or not married, if you're together for years. So that is the complexity of relationship that I was talking about through this book. But through every book, through each of my books, I always talk about the positive light of the whole problem. So through this book also, I'm trying to say talk about how self love is important, how first you have to love yourself to love someone else, how it is important to accept yourself before you can accept somebody else. These are the issues that I as a person have realized it through my journey. So these are the messages I was trying to tell the reader, that you can love someone to death, but if you don't love yourself, you can't be happy. So I always talk about self discovery through all of my poetry books, because that is something that I have realized about myself through poetry, is something that I think is most important, how much you value yourself and your worth. And then, everything gets better around you. First, you should value yourself. Yeah.
right. That's actually very true. And again, as a psychologist, is something that we talk to our clients about as well. That as cliche as it sounds, that you need to love yourself for people to love you. It is true. I don't know how someone is supposed to love me or what is the kind of love I want if I don't love myself. So, very rightly put across. Coming to you, Vinita, your anthology Open Your Eyes was widely appreciated for addressing climate change. So, when tackling such a pressing issue like climate change, how do you balance the urgency and hope in your poetry?
Yeah. May I just take a second and just address Tanushi and say that I do agree with a lot of what you're saying, especially that brevity is the soul of wit, and indeed poetry. Poetry needs to be compact instead of very verbose. Yeah, so coming to your question, this anthology, Open Your Eyes, holding it up here, and my own collection of eco poetry, Eartha. So I'll just refer to Open Your Eyes. It was born during the pandemic. It was published in 2020, when the pandemic had just hit us. And the purpose was certainly to sensitize our readers to all the damage that we had done to our earth, and to all the threat and despair that we were feeling as a community, and to bring hope, because it was clear that climate change was at our doorstep and it was imminent and it was happening as we speak. It had already kind of taken place. So there's this biggest test to poetry, that if you shake it, it shouldn't rattle. Then you can consider a poem to be complete. So with this anthology, Open Your Eyes, I felt that when you shook this anthology, it didn't rattle. It kind of came together, and it was a real, and the credit goes entirely to all its contributors. They had such pertinent things to say and such impactful poetry in that genre of eco poetry. So it was really a rock solid book in that sense. And I would like to thank once again all the contributors of Open Your Eyes and the subsequent anthology also, Count Every Breath. So the focus was on specificity of climate change. That was the core thing. And there's a very famous Polish poet who also won the Nobel Prize, Czesław Miłosz. He used to say that poetry it can only sensitize readers. It can't bring about an actual change. It's not something that you can take to the streets and actually bring about a change. You can only work on people's minds and hearts and make them sensitive enough to be the change themselves, as Gandhi famously said. So in that sense, Open Your Eyes was written with that intent. It was written with a very dedicated frame of mind. And the whole thing was, like I said, it was all like as if the climate catastrophe was already here and we needed to deal with it. And how best to deal with it with literary activism in the form of poetry. That's where Open Your Eyes occurred and happened. And it worked very well, fortunately. Fortunately, for the sake of nature, it worked very well.
Right, that's true. And you rightly quoted Gandhiji here that, be the change you want to see. It's no poem, no one else,
nothing else.
Philosopher would come and tell you or push you to change. No president, prime minister can do that. It has to be you ultimately. They can all be catalysts, just like poems can be.
Yes,
but ultimately it has to be us who genuinely decide to make that change. So very nicely put. And as we wrap up today, it was lovely, and I would like to really thank you for your insights. It was a very powerful and enlightening session and conversation with both of you. Anything that you would want to add to this before we end today's session?
You can start, Vinita ma'am. You can start.
No, nothing that I really want to add. It's just that the questions were very insightful and they took us to the right answers. So thank you for posing all those wonderful questions.
Thank you so much for answering them so aptly and insightfully as well. Yes, Tanushi, you would like to say.
I had a lovely time. I always enjoy talking to writers and poets, and you were a lovely moderator. I enjoyed lovely asking us the right questions and taking us back to our writing journey. I would like to just share all my 3 books that were published in India through the book Bakers. He's the agent who has really helped me through my writing, has always shown me so much. So this is the first book that came out, Pursuit of Sunshine and Rain. Basically, it is like the wound is the place where the light enters, as Rumi quotes. So you need darkness to find light. You have to, yeah, that is the whole idea. Yeah, so that is the whole idea of this book. It's a total motivational, inspirational theme book, and this book is Echoes of Silence. As I said, it's a spiritual based book. Which was written during the pandemic, where all of us were like, unpredictability was the time. We didn't know what was going to happen ahead, and I think all of us prayed to God for everything to get better back then, right? And then this is about relationships and on love, the latest one.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And both the books that I've seen, I mean, all 3 of yours, as well as the books that Vinita shared, are all, the cover in itself seems so explanatory and deep in itself. So, rightly said, like we were praying to God, we were doing anything that came to our disposal, banging plates, if any of us remember, but, anything that came, literally anything that came to our disposal, any desperate measure possible. So yes, thank you so much for this enlightening conversation and a lovely time that we all had together, sharing our experiences, understanding how poetry can genuinely, again, act as a catalyst to bring change, and would like to do that appreciatively. And the conversation about resilience, creativity, our impact. Thank you so much for your journey. Thank you so much, Tanushi. Thank you for Vinita for sharing your journeys, your insights, and the stories behind the incredible work that we finally see in the market. So I hope this discussion was inspiring and enlightening for you as well, just as it was for me. Thank you so much for the session today. If there is anything that you would like to end with, I would love to hear that.
I would just like to end with the message to everyone that just read and read more poetry. Read as much poetry as you can.
Right, true. Thank you so much.